A kid, a construction worker, basically an intern, is losing his mind because every single night, right around sunset, something invisible grabs his hand, sucks the life out of his thumb, and steals half his paycheck. Every night, same time, and nobody believes him. That's not a movie pitch. That's line one of a real ancient document, and the guy who fixes this kid's problem does it by putting a magic ring on his finger and throwing it at a demon like it's a dodgeball. I'm not exaggerating. That's genuinely how this story starts. No slow build, no in the beginning. It just opens with a possessed teenager and a king who's about to go full exorcist/detective on the entire underworld. Okay, so before we go further, I need to be really upfront with you about something, because people mix this up constantly. This is not in the Bible. It never was. Not in the Old Testament, not the New Testament, not the Catholic Bible, not the Jewish Tanakh, nothing. This is what scholars call a pseudepigraphal text, which is just a fancy word for somebody wrote this centuries later and slapped a famous name on it to make it sound legit. So no church council ever voted this thing into Scripture. It got left out on purpose. And once you hear what's actually in it, you'll understand exactly why. This is the Testament of Solomon, and it is one of the strangest, most under-talked about documents to survive from the ancient world. It's basically a field manual for hunting demons, written like a court transcript, and it quietly became the secret ancestor of almost every demon-summoning grimoire that showed up over the next 1,500 years. Ars Goetia, the Lesser Key of Solomon, half of Renaissance occult magic, it all traces back to this weird little book that almost nobody's actually read. So, let's get into it. Who wrote this thing? Why? And what is actually hiding inside it that even people who've heard of the Testament of Solomon usually miss? Here's the setup in full. Solomon is mid-construction on the temple in Jerusalem. This is supposedly the most important building project in the ancient Israelite world. And one of his favorite workers, a boy he treats almost like a son, starts wasting away, getting thinner, weaker, losing his pay somehow, even though nobody's stealing it in any way Solomon can see. Solomon pulls the kid aside and asks him directly what's going on, and the boy tells him every evening near sunset this demon shows up looking like fire, latches onto his right thumb, drains something out of him, and takes half his food and half his wages. Nobody else can see it, just him. Now here's the detail almost every retelling skips. The demon has a name, and it's not some generic evil spirit. His name is Orneus, and Orneus isn't just a random vampire ghost. Later in the text, he actually explains what he is, a shapeshifter who can turn into a lion, appears specifically around the constellation Aquarius, and, this is the part that gets left out constantly, he claims responsibility for something way more specific than sucking energy. He says he's the demon behind childhood speech disorders, the one who smashes the heads of infants who go on to become mute, and the one who slips into a crying baby at night disguised as its own cry. That's the actual line in the text. He's not just a random nuisance demon. He's framed as an explanation for infant mortality and disability in the ancient world, which tells you something huge about why this book got written in the first place. We'll circle back to that. So, Solomon does what any reasonable Iron Age king would do. He goes into the half-built temple and prays, basically begging God for a way to actually catch this thing. And he gets an answer. Not a vision, not a dream, an actual physical object. The archangel Michael descends and hands him a ring. And this ring is the single most important object in the entire story. So let's slow down here for a second, because most people who've heard of Solomon's magic ring have no idea what it actually looked like or how it worked. Pop culture has trained you to picture Solomon's ring as having the Star of David on it,
the six-pointed hexagram. That's actually not what the original text says. The Testament of Solomon describes the stone on the ring as engraved with what it calls a pentalpha, literally 5 Greek letter A's arranged so their points form a 5-pointed star, a pentagram, not a hexagram. This is a genuinely huge detail for anyone into the history of symbols, because this text is basically ground zero, the earliest known place where a pentagram gets explicitly and directly tied to King Solomon's power. The 6-pointed Star of David seal that shows up in almost every movie and video game version of this story, that's a much later swap, mostly coming out of medieval Arabic magical texts and Kabbalistic traditions centuries afterward. The original seal, as far as this document is concerned, has 5 points, not 6. And the ring doesn't work the way you'd think either. It's not a point and zap situation. It works by contact. You physically throw it or press it against the demon's body, specifically the chest, and say a set command phrase. The moment metal touches demon, the demon is bound. No spellcasting required, no incantation beyond a simple sentence, just contact and a name. So Solomon hands this ring to the traumatized kid and basically says, "Tonight, when it shows up, don't run, throw this at it." And the kid does it. Orneus appears at the usual hour, reaches for the boy's thumb like always, and gets a ring thrown directly into his chest. Instantly, the demon starts screaming, begging, offering him gold, silver, anything, just take it off. The kid, understandably terrified, but also apparently pretty ballsy for a possessed teenager, refuses and drags the now bound demon straight to the king. And here's where the story takes its first real turn, because Solomon doesn't banish Orneus, he doesn't destroy him, he interrogates him. This is genuinely the part of the Testament of Solomon that separates it from literally every other ancient demon text, and it's the part that gets skipped constantly in summaries. Most of this book isn't narrative, it's a transcript. Solomon brings a demon in front of his throne and runs the exact same 4 questions on almost every single one of them. What's your name? What star, constellation, or zodiac sign governs you? What specific harm do you inflict on human beings? And, critically, what angel or holy name cancels you? It reads less like a horror story and more like an intake interview at some kind of cosmic prison intake desk. And because of that format, the Testament of Solomon ends up being one of the very first attempts in Western history to actually organize and catalog demons systematically, assign them names, jurisdictions, specific ailments they cause, and specific countermeasures. This structure, name, sign, harm, weakness, is directly where later grimoires like the Ars Goetia, part of the infamous Lesser Key of Solomon written over 1,000 years afterward, got their entire format from. When you see a demon summoning book with 72 named demons, each listed with their rank, their powers, and the ritual needed to control them, you are looking at the descendant of this exact interrogation structure. So once Orneus is bound, Solomon orders him to go grab his boss. And Orneus's boss turns out to be the prince of all demons himself, Beelzebul. Now here's a detail that gets missed constantly, and it's honestly the most theologically wild moment in the entire book. When Beelzebul is finally dragged in and interrogated, Solomon asks him who he used to be. And Beelzebul says flat out that he was once the highest-ranking angel in heaven. Not a metaphor, not implied, directly stated. This is one of the earliest surviving texts to explicitly frame the chief demon as a literal fallen angel, a former top-tier member of the divine court who got cast down. That idea feels so baked into modern Christian pop culture, Satan, the fallen angel, that people assume it's straight out of Genesis. It's not. Genesis never says that. This idea gets built up gradually across other apocryphal texts, and the Testament of Solomon is one of the clearest, earliest places it shows up in this specific form.
With Beelzebul bound, Solomon now effectively owns the entire chain of command in hell, and this is where the book shifts from one weird possession case into something much bigger, an entire cosmic workforce being pressed into slave labor to build the temple.
Okay, so here's where I need to pause and give you the open loop, because we are about to get into the single strangest gallery of monsters in ancient literature, and there's one demon coming up who is basically a direct ancestor of one of the most famous evil women in all of folklore. Keep that in the back of your mind. We'll get there. Because once Beelzebul is under control, Solomon starts pulling in demon after demon, and each one is stranger than the last. There's Oniscalus, a demon who appears as a strikingly beautiful woman from the waist up, but with the legs of a mule underneath. Solomon puts her to work spinning hemp into rope for the temple, because apparently even demons get assigned manual labor based on their skill set. There's Asmodeus, and if that name rings a bell, it's because he shows up earlier in the Book of Tobit, which actually is in some Bibles depending on your tradition. In the Testament, Asmodeus admits his whole deal is ruining virgin brides and causing violence between husbands and wives, and he specifically names the angel Raphael as his natural enemy, explaining he can be driven off by burning the liver and gallbladder of a specific catfish. I'm not making that up. That's the literal countermeasure listed in the text. There's a demon with no head at all who identifies himself purely as lecherous and says he can only be defeated by writing a holy name directly onto his skull. There's a horsefish hybrid sea demon who causes seasickness and shipwrecks and requires an absurdly specific ritual involving bowls and rope to subdue. And then there's Obizoth. Obizoth is described as a female spirit with wild, disheveled hair, and when Solomon asks what she does, her answer is chilling in how specific it is. She says she doesn't rest. She roams the world at night searching for women in labor, and when she finds a chance, she strangles newborn infants in their cradles. She also causes miscarriages, blindness in children, and various other reproductive harms. Now, here's the part almost nobody connects when they talk about this text. Obizoth is functionally, almost beat for beat, the same figure as Lilith, the child-killing night demon from later Jewish folklore, who becomes massively famous in medieval Kabbalistic writing and eventually pop culture. Except Obizoth predates the fully developed Lilith the baby killer tradition in most of the texts where that legend gets fleshed out. This is one of the clearest surviving fingerprints of that entire myth taking shape, and it's sitting inside a document most people have never even heard the name of. If you've ever seen the Lilith legend referenced in a horror movie or a tattoo or a metal album cover, there's a real chance the actual root of that specific image, the strangling newborns at night detail, passes directly through this text. And after Obizoth, the demons keep coming. 36 of them arrive together at one point, spirits tied to the 36 decans, which is an old Egyptian system dividing the zodiac into 10-degree segments, each with its own ruling spirit. Each of these 36 demons claims responsibility for a specific physical ailment, headaches, sore throats, fevers, tremors, and each one hands over the exact countermeasure to cure it. One demon literally causes tonsillitis and can only be driven off by writing a specific word on ivy leaves and stacking them in a pile. This section reads almost like an ancient folk medicine textbook disguised as a horror interrogation, which honestly might be exactly what it was for whoever originally compiled it, a working document, not just a scary story. Here's your second reset, because the story's about to take a hard turn away from creepy interviews into something closer to an actual quest, and it involves trapping a hurricane inside a wineskin. Word reaches Solomon that Arabia is being tormented by a wind demon so powerful it's tearing the land apart. Solomon sends a servant out with the ring and one very specific instruction: hold an empty wineskin open against the wind, keep the ring pressed in front of the opening, and wait until the bag fills completely, then seal it shut. The servant does exactly that and drags the now captured wind demon back to Jerusalem in a literal bag.
This demon identifies himself as Ephipas, and his power turns out to be exactly what Solomon needs at that moment.
because the temple's cornerstone, the single largest, heaviest block needed to finish the entrance, has been sitting abandoned because it's simply too massive for human workers to lift into place. Ephipas, once bound, lifts it himself. Then things escalate one more level. Ephipas and a second demon, pulled straight out of the Red Sea, haul up a mysterious column made of some material the ancient translators genuinely couldn't agree on how to describe. Most versions land somewhere around purple or a strange reddish stone. And this Red Sea demon, once questioned, reveals something enormous. He claims he's the very spirit who backed the Egyptian magicians against Moses back in Exodus, the one who hardened Pharaoh's heart against letting the Israelites go. And he says that after the Red Sea closed on Pharaoh's army, he got trapped underwater along with them, pinned beneath that same column for centuries, until Ephipas finally showed up and the two of them lifted it together. Think about what that means structurally. This text is quietly claiming that one of the villains from the Exodus story has been sitting at the bottom of the Red Sea the entire time, and Solomon is the one who finally fishes him out. That's a wild piece of world building, hiding in a text most people have literally never opened. So by this point, Solomon has an entire demonic workforce. He's got the prince of hell taking orders. He's got infant killers spinning rope. He's got a captured hurricane lifting stones. He's basically running the most disturbing construction crew in human history. And the temple gets finished. Peak of his power. Peak of his wisdom. This should be the ending. It's not. The final chapters take a hard, almost uncomfortable turn. Solomon falls for a foreign woman, a Shunammite, and she refuses him unless he does something for her family's religion, sacrifice to two specific gods, Moloch and Remphan. Now Solomon knows exactly what this means. He's not tricked, he's not possessed. He does it anyway, for her. And the text is oddly restrained about it. He doesn't go all in. He crushes 5 locusts in his hand as a token offering, basically the smallest, most half-hearted sacrifice imaginable. And that's enough. The moment he does it, the text says the Spirit of God simply leaves him. No dramatic battle, no lightning, it just leaves. And immediately, Solomon says his own wisdom starts draining out of him, and he becomes, in his own words, a laughingstock, mocked by ordinary people, and worse, mocked by the very demons he used to command. The book ends with Solomon directly addressing the reader, not a narrator talking about him in first person, warning you specifically not to throw away everything you believe in for the sake of a woman, the way he did. And that ending is exactly why this text never made it into any Bible. Whoever wrote this wasn't trying to glorify Solomon. They were writing a cautionary tale using his name as the vehicle. A guy who conquered literal hell itself and still lost everything because of one bad decision made for the wrong reason. That's not scripture. That's closer to a folk legend with a built-in warning label.
Now here's the part that turns this from a spooky story into something genuinely fascinating from a historical standpoint. Nobody actually knows for certain who wrote the Testament of Solomon, or exactly when. Scholars have argued for over a century, and the honest answer is the dating is genuinely disputed. Estimates range from somewhere in the first few centuries after the start of the Common Era, based on Greek magical and astrological traditions of the Eastern Mediterranean, all the way through later medieval editing and expansion. The manuscripts we actually have copies of come from centuries later than that, meaning the version circulating today was very likely reworked and added to over a long stretch of time, blending Jewish, early Christian, Greek, Egyptian, and even Arabic magical traditions into one composite document.
It's less like a single book and more like a magical tradition that kept absorbing new material for hundreds of years, all filed under one famous king's name because that made it more credible and more marketable. And that borrowed authority worked incredibly well because the influence of this text massively outlived the text itself. The core idea, a wise king who can bind and command demons using a signet ring and a spoken command, becomes the seed for an entire genre of later magical literature. The Key of Solomon, the Lesser Key of Solomon, the Ars Goetia with its full roster of 72 ranked demons, Renaissance-era grimoires that European magicians were secretly copying by candlelight centuries later. All of it traces its DNA back to a barely known Greek document about a possessed construction worker's thumb. So the next time you see the Star of David called Solomon's Seal in a movie, or you see a pentagram used in some occult context, or you come across a list of ranked demons, each with a specific weakness, you're looking at echoes of this exact document. A text that never made it into any official scripture, written by authors we'll probably never identify with certainty, about a king interrogating the underworld like a homicide detective, who ultimately loses everything, not to a demon, but to himself.